Whenever there's a leadership transition, there's always a mix of excitement and disappointment among the public. But what really demands their scrutiny is what kind of economic, welfare, security, and foreign policies the new president-elect will implement. For more details on the Korean presidential elections, we're going to speak with Professor Jung-hoon of Yonsei University. Thank you, Professor, so much for being here and for your time today.
It's a pleasure being here.
Well, let's talk about this. We are wrapping up 2012 on quite an exciting note. We had the presidential elections, a very tight race. How would you evaluate it first?
Well, it was precisely that, a very tight race, huge turnout, a lot bigger of a turnout than a lot of people expected.
Elections, right.
Despite the fact that it was very cold. It was like minus 10 degrees Celsius. Last year, I think it was like 63% turnout. This year, it was 75.8%, so almost 76% turnout. And the opposition party, the Democratic Party, was of the opinion that if it's over 70%, that they're most likely to win. If it's over 77%, guaranteed win. So in that sense, I guess it was an upset, if you will.
Right.
So it was very interesting.
What kind of president do you think it was that the Korean people wanted or needed at this point in time?
Well, I think we need a president who represents stability. Stability because we have the global economic meltdown. It's going to be very difficult to continue to register some level of growth in the Korean economy. And of course, Madame Park Geun-hye, as well as the opposition candidate Moon Jae-in, they were promising and pledging a lot of welfare packages and economic stimulus packages. Well, that's all great, but you need the economic background. You need the economy to grow. You need the pie to be very large in order to be able to distribute. And therefore, it's going to be very important for Park Geun-hye to be, for the next 5 years, continue to spur on the economy so that the economy will continue to grow so that she'll be able to follow up on a lot of the welfare policies that she was promising.
I'm actually really glad you brought that up because one of the biggest buzzwords, keywords, was economic democratization, right? Now, let's go over, being that Park Geun-hye was elected, what is her position on economic democratization? Because it can be interpreted very differently, right? And how do you think her plans will be realized?
I think both Park Geun-hye and Moon Jae-in were talking about economic democratization because there is that term in the constitution of South Korea. But how they interpret it is quite different.
Right.
I think Park Geun-hye is very much in favor of the market forces. It's not like she's going to have the government meddling in or interfering to somehow upset the market forces of South Korea. And that, because that, in the end, will eventually lead to the downturn of the economy because Korea is so tightly intertwined with the global economy. We are a trading nation. I think last year, December, we reached the $1 trillion trade mark, which ranked us number 9 in the history of the world. So we are a trading nation. The fact that we are an open economy is very important in terms of maintaining our image. So I don't think she means to interfere or meddle in the market forces, but rather, free market. But rather, I think what she's talking about is fairness in the society, where the gap between the haves and the have-not will be so great that the have-nots will not have a hope. I think she's talking about a fairness in terms of a system where if you invest a lot of time and effort, if you work hard, that there's commensurate return for the work that you put into. And she's going to make sure that there's a system and justice where this kind of guarantee is provided. And that's what she's talking about. I don't think we can expect, because she's talking about economic democratization, that government will be very much in the middle of everything. No, I think she will leave that to the market forces.
Okay. Let's turn our focus then away from the economy onto another very important issue, a determining factor, I think, in people's votes. That's North Korea. And President Lee Myung-bak, he was very known for his hardline stance against North Korea. Now, our two presidential candidates, they both promised to have more engagements with Pyongyang. Let's talk a little bit, though, about Park Geun-hye's stance towards North Korea. What can we expect under her leadership?
Well, I mean, if you read from her campaign pledges, I think she's opened her arms to the Pyongyang regime, that she's willing to talk and have dialogue with the new leadership in North Korea under Kim Jong-un. But it's not without conditions. I mean, there are certain things that needs to be taken care of first. For example, North Korea must be held accountable and responsible for its previous provocations, most namely the sinking of the Cheonan ship, killing 46 South Korean sailors, and also the uncalled for bombing of the Yeonpyeong Island. You might go even further back, and I think you will recall that one of the South Korean tourists touring Kumgang Mountain was shot dead. It was a woman. And that led to the shutting down of the Kumgang Mountain tourist business. So there's a lot of provocations along the way that North Korea simply would not admit to doing, and is yet to apologize for these provocations, causing a lot of pain to a lot of people in South Korea. So first things first, North Korea must come clean on these issues, and once it does that, it will lead to trust building between the two Koreas. And once we're able to do that, she's going to be very open in terms of providing aid and humanitarian assistance to North Korea in the hope of creating, quote-unquote, real peace on the Korean Peninsula.
Do you think the most recent rocket launch, I'm sure it affected the way South Koreans view the North, right? Do you think that's going to affect her stance at all? Or, like you said, just kind of stick with seeing first how North Korea is, whether they show remorse or whatnot?
Yeah, it's a very bad development because it simply points to the fact that Kim Jong-un it seems like, is going to carry on, inherit his father's legacy, legacies in terms of provocations towards South Korea and to the world as well. And this long-range missile, is an intercontinental ballistic missile. It's a threat to the world as a whole, and particularly to the United States. I think you know that the range can be as far as 13,000 kilometers, which means that, yes, not just the West Coast, but Washington, D.C. and New York, theoretically is within the range. So it's a major provocation. And the fact that North Korea has the nuclear weapons program, which means that now it has the long-range delivery vehicle, these provocations. But experts point out the fact that whenever there were missile provocations, it will be followed by nuclear tests. And I believe that that may be just up ahead, maybe into the early part of next year. Maybe not a plutonium-based nuclear test, but a uranium-based nuclear test, because plutonium, weapons-grade plutonium is very hard to get, and therefore they may be to the presidential election. Park Geun-hye made every effort to be viewed as a political leader who is supporting cohesion and unity in Korea, and she was able to bring about support of the former followers of Kim Dae-jung. So a lot of those people who are sort of like traditional original members of the Democratic Party, followers of Kim Dae-jung, those people who would be considered as former victims of the Park Chung-hee regime, actually came out to support her. And I think that's a very, very big step forward in the process towards unity. There are many people, again, in the 60s and the 70s who might have been victimized for their pro-democracy activism and so on, poets and others they have also come forward to support Park Geun-hye. So I think these are very important preliminary steps, and I hope the extent of the support base expands so that I don't think you can, like within the next 5 years, completely eradicate the division within South Korea. But I think, I hope that there will be a substantial foundation established as we move forward into the future, so that come 10 years, 15 years down the line, we will no longer have this polarization issue, that there is only one issue, and that's a national issue about patriotism. What's in the best interest of Korea? And I hope there's no division on that question somewhere down the line.
Well, regardless whether people were for Moon Jae-in or Park Geun-hye, of course, we have the new president-elect. So on that note of national cohesion, I think it's important to support the leader for the next 5 years. What is your forecast for the next 5 years?
Well, I think it's bright. I want to remain positive despite some difficulties ahead. Surely there will be obstacles driven from both external factors and from internal factors. Externally, as we've talked about, the economic issue, the global economic meltdown. How is South Korea, a big trading nation, a major trading country, is going to be able to cope with this external economic environment will be a big question mark. Security-wise as well, there are some negative forecasts looking into East Asian security because of these crisscrossing of the conflicting territorial claims, not only between South Korea and Japan, but between China and Japan over Senkaku Diaoyutai, China in Southeast Asia over Spratlys, Paracel, Scarborough, having conflicts with the Philippines, Vietnam. Japan has issues with Russia over the northern territories. South Korea has issues with China as well over Eodo. So there are many aspects that may appear to be very destabilizing. So these are hurdles that the new government must overcome in order to bring about stability and peace. And it's a good thing that she has a lot of experience in meeting with foreign dignitaries and leaders. She's very global in her outlook, and therefore I believe that these are aspects that's going to help her in dealing with the new leaderships in China, Japan, and the United States, and being able to cope with these issues. Internally, we have a problem because there's obviously a great deal of polarization. Polarization in terms of politics, in terms of ideology, and she's made a full commitment to bring about unity in this country. This is something that's going to be a big process. So I don't think you can solve everything within the next 5 years, but we hope that she'll be able to lay the foundations for the gradual unification of South Korea as a whole, so that some 10 years, 15 years down the line, we don't have these issues. The only issue will be just different approaches, different methodologies towards the same goal, whether you're in the opposition camp or in the ruling camp. And that I hope that the great majority of the Korean people will be patriotic enough to have, to share in unison, what is best for Korea's interest. How best to bring about Korea's greater national interest in the global context. So there may be some variances as to how to get there, but as to the goal, the target of Korea will be the same. And I hope that eventually we'll get there.
Well, they say Rome wasn't built in a day, probably wasn't built in 5 years either, right? So hopefully we'll start to take steps in that direction regardless. But thank you so much again for your time and for your insight into, I guess, the future of Korea, and definitely taking a look at the presidential elections.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.